24 hours a day actually with the building. And the contract and rate management, logistics analysts, systems admins, there's all these different key functions here that are involved in getting something from, you know, a grower here to a warehouse that's over here to a store up in Kansas City maybe. But all these people here, you know, only about 20% of them actually work for me. I've got a junior transportation manager that reports up to me. I've got 2 transportation supervisors. I've got a contract admin, and I've got a couple of logistics analysts as well. And but aside from that, the routing team, those people actually work for another company that is our dedicated fleet provider who handles a lot of the day-to-day logistics functions. The track and trace operation, that's the exact same thing. Those people also work for that other company. We have contractors that come in and help us with the systems admin pieces as well. So, but honestly, if you talk to most of those people, and if you'd observe us all working together, nobody would notice any difference. Everybody would think these are all Sprouts people, and that's all our mindsets when we approach the situation. I collaborate more with the people on the routing team, especially their leaders, when we're talking about our routing strategies and cost savings initiatives, than I do people in my own organization in most cases. So, those lines are really blurred. And I think in any functional supply chain where you do have multiple parties like that, that's a really, really critical piece, that collaboration and keeping those walls broken down between organizations as you work together towards that common goal. You establish that, you come up with the best solutions because you got people with different ideas coming to the table. And not only that, too, you get to leverage just that much more experience and expertise when you do have to react to situations that inevitably have gone bad that you have to fix.
You mentioned inbound. How much do you import, and what are some of the complications for that one?
So the imports, I'm going to start with the caveat that I don't deal directly with most of the imports anymore. I used to actually in a past life. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. There's some interesting things that come with that. But as a percentage of imports, I think it's a little under half that we get, and even the stuff that we pick up, we'll pick it up from the ports. So it's already come. Bananas have already come from a ship from Ecuador or Costa Rica or something like that. So we might pick it up at the Port of Los Angeles or the Port of Long Beach, and we might at that point take it to a gassing facility for it to be processed further, or we might take it directly to our DCs if it's already been processed at the port. So there's also a number of other commodities that we'll get from overseas. The biggest thing usually is stuff just not getting cleared by customs a lot. That's the single thing that I would say probably leads to delays more than anything, is when the shipment is planned, there's an expected day that it's going to be ready for pickup for it to be cleared, and there's some piece of the customs paperwork or some part of the customs process that the original shipper didn't handle, and then at that point, product's not going anywhere until customs is satisfied.
And if it's produce that has to be fresh, that's a problem.
Yep, that's exactly it. Yeah. Now, for other commodities, you may not be in a situation where the product is dying and losing shelf life, but there could be other consequences for the late deliveries. And I'll give you another example. Is when I lived in the area, actually a few years prior to moving out to Arizona, I worked for Penske Logistics and worked on the Whirlpool manufacturing account for inbound parts going into all their plants in North America. I think at the time there was about a dozen or so in the United States and another few in Mexico. And we had a regular shipment a few times a week that would be picked up in Monterrey, Mexico, and get to our warehouse in Ohio. The way that usually works is you have a carrier that's authorized to operate within Mexico only that handles the pickup and takes them to like an Expeditors or customs clearing company's warehouse on the Nuevo Laredo side of the border. So there, the product sits until the dray carrier comes to pick it up. Dray carrier crosses the border with it, then drops it on the U.S. warehouse on the American side of the border. And at that point, everything's on hold until customs has cleared everything with the paperwork that was submitted directly by the shipper. Then at that point, everything goes well. And we have our own truck on the U.S. side that's operated authorized to operate in the United States. They pick it up from Laredo, and in about 2.5 days, they'll get to the plant in Ohio. I think some of you guys are familiar with manufacturing environments. So when you have multiple assembly lines, there might be schedule changes on a regular basis, right? Sometimes it's just a production change. Sometimes it's something a vendor did wrong or a part that didn't show up, but they happen pretty frequently. So meantime, all of a sudden they had a schedule change at the plant that we were sending these circuit boards to. And that product that was still about a day and a half out on the truck actually needed to be there in about 6 hours. So in those situations, what we do is we charter a plane. And as much as expensive as the plane might be, say it's $10,000 to get a couple of skids or something up to a plant in Ohio from Mexico, a line shutdown can cost 10 times that. If you shut down an entire plant, that could cost 6 figures an hour potentially. So time sensitivity is there. It's just, for different reasons than what I'm doing currently. So in this situation, we actually tried to charter a plane, and everything went well with the pickup. Plane traveled safely, landed in Ohio. In the meantime, the customs paperwork wasn't cleared. And basically everything's got to be filled out to the satisfaction of the customs inspector, who is going to approve or deny the passing of that shipment into the country. And there was an issue with the commercial invoice in this case. There's supplementary documents as part of the commercial invoice, sometimes depending on the commodity. And these were circuit boards, and there was a requirement that for circuit boards had to be documented on the supplementary commercial invoice what type of radio waves it emitted. And well, the shipper didn't fill that out to the satisfaction of the U.S. Customs Office there in Ohio. So we had that shipment. Took about 2 days for that to get worked out, for the shipper to correctly and completely fill out the documents. The truck that was the reason for the air charter in the first place, because it wouldn't be there for a day and a half, that truck beat the plane to the plant as far as that product getting there. So we spent $10,000 for nothing. There was a line shut down for, I think, a short amount of time, but that cost some money. And there was also a situation now where, in order to avoid a day-long line shutdown, they need to reschedule other production lines, which led to additional expedites elsewhere in the network to make sure that the parts necessary to run that assembly line were on site. So all in all, because you're talking about something the shipper did here, that shipper got charged back about a $40,000 bill because of their paperwork error. And I said earlier, the devil is in the details, right? It's so important with paperwork and documentation like that. I think you guys actually just covered a lot of that this week in terms of different types of documents. I mean, your I's have to be well, don't cross the I's. You can dot the I's, you can cross the T's, and make sure that happens every time, because there's one piece of information that's missing could create some liability, could hold up your shipment, and there's just all types of reasons it could go wrong and ultimately lead to money having to be spent downstream, or costing money even on the front end. Bills of lading, it's the same way. I mean, and pretty much any time in your guys' careers, if you guys have to fill something out, make sure you're doing it completely, not missing any details, not missing any descriptions that are necessary. Because honestly, the more and better documentation you have, the more your company is protected against any of those types of losses. You're still going to have stuff that happens from time to time, of course. But, again, it goes back to controlling what you can control. Your paperwork, your documentation, you can control that. And it's important that every organization does a good job with that stuff.
Yeah, we were just talking about a visit I had yesterday at a gear factory where they had a $14,000 part that had to be scrapped. And that's compared to the $40,000 charge back over paperwork.
Yeah, it's amazing that the things that could happen from that too. It can create liability as well if you don't have that handled. I give you another example, and this is pivoting back to what I do now. With produce shipping, when you have a produce load that shows up at your distribution center, it has to go through a rigorous quality control inspection process. We don't want to be receiving in junk that we're going to have to ship to our stores and sell. So it's got to be in good conditions. I mean, there's FDA standards, and to be honest with you, with Sprouts, FDA standards might be here, and well, ours are probably up to here actually. So, you have a rigorous standard, and you have rejections sometimes. You have situations where the vendor shipped older product, or could also have situations too where it was subject to incorrect temperatures for a couple days while on a truck coming from California to Texas. And in that case, either way, we can't deal with the product. So one of the things we have to do is make sure that our documentation is accurate, not only in terms of capturing the defect on the product, the reason for the rejection, but also to ascertain how it happened and which party is responsible for it. So I don't know if Dad, have you guys talked about freight, like freight terms, Incoterms, and like FOB versus FOB origin versus FOB delivered?
I would like you to get into that a little bit. We have not in class. It is a little bit in the MSSC material. So. Okay.
All right. Well, in a nutshell, guys, if it's FOB origin, that basically means that ownership is transferring at the point of pickup. So if Sprouts is purchasing produce from a vendor where the freight terms are FOB origin, that means that the shipper is selling us the product. We are taking possession of it, subject to quality inspection, and but that ownership and custody transfers right there, and therefore we coordinate the transportation piece to get it to our facility. If it's FOB destination, and in the produce world, sometimes that's called delivered, vendor delivered, that'd be synonymous too. Then that means that ownership doesn't transfer until it actually shows up at our dock. And again, it's all according to PACA and a few other laws that are specific to the produce industry. Everybody understands that it's got to pass inspection before being received in, and then only at that point does the ownership officially transfer. But in the meantime, the liability comes with the transfer of custody. So getting back to that, when we have a product that shows up at our DC and it's bad product, it's our quality control team's responsibility to identify what happened and why and document it, because our case is going to be shot if we can't prove it one way or the other. And it's pretty normal that these situations are not very black and white. It's pretty normal that there may be a few defects, a few pieces of information available that may partially support a case one way or the other. It's almost like preparing for a court case, and you have to pretend that you're lawyers. And in any court case, it's not about what happened, it's about what you can prove, right? And in the situation of rejections, if we're going to hold a vendor accountable, we have to prove that for transportation that we coordinated, that the truck didn't cause that damage. Or if we are going to go after the carrier, we have to prove that it is the carrier's responsibility when submitting a claim, so that the claim is basically, it can't be argued with, to increase the likelihood that we're going to get paid in full. And if a carrier denies the claim, then at that point, we can choose to either drop it, which sometimes that might happen because the cost to go recover the cost to litigate it is more than the cost of the product, or we can go to arbitration or sometimes even court. But again, that's where the documentation comes into play. We have, I remember one day in particular, one time a few years back, we had a load of asparagus came in that turned out to be a 6-month fight. In this situation here, I don't remember what the exact defect was on it, but it was something that could possibly be attributed to temperature. And bottom line, we had a bill of lading that we signed out without any notation on. And for those of you guys who might not be familiar with that, if you reject something, you're going to give the truck driver his paperwork back. But whether you keep it or not, if you're rejecting something, you have to notate that rejection has occurred on the document, because that legal document, that bill of lading, establishes the condition of the product at the first transfer of custody when the truck picked it up, and the final transfer of custody when it got delivered to the consignee. So with that in mind, we messed ourselves up pretty good there by not documenting the rejection appropriately, which limits our case against the carrier. The vendor did not put a temp tail device, which is a little remote temperature recorder that captures the inside temperatures of the transit. They're supposed to put those on one of the pallets in the shipment. They declined to do that, so we're missing that documentation. What else? We had our rejection form too. Our quality control team didn't do the best job in this situation of documenting exactly what was wrong and exactly what caused the issue. So the vendor said, no, that has to be because of temperatures. And well, we go back to the carrier and say, okay, you need to provide us a temperature history from the data logger on the refrigeration unit. And the carrier was unable to do it because apparently this particular trailer was one of 1% of trailers that they have that actually did not have their data loggers functioning. So we're stuck with a bill now that we got to try and go after the vendor or the carrier for to try and recover. It's pretty clear. We didn't do anything to the product. Somebody did, but we're out potentially $20,000 if we can't prove it. Well, because our documentation was flimsy, we wound up settling with the vendor for about half of it, but we couldn't go back to the carrier on it because we did such a poor job of documenting the issue when it showed up. And in the end, okay, we only recovered $10,000 out of $20,000 on that load, but we had to eat 10 grand just simply because our documentation wasn't good enough.
Everybody loves documenting, don't they? Show of hands, who loves doing detailed documentation? Nobody.
It's mundane, it's tedious, but it's so important.
And how, do you do any kind of measurements on that?
What, like claims percentages?
Documentation, do you review it? Do you sample it? Do you do any of that stuff?
Yeah, I do. Not so much for the rejections. It's a different department, but we require our dedicated fleets to keep records of, keep signed copies of bills of lading, yard logs to basically track what trailers are on site and if they're running, what temperatures they're at. We require them to log trailer washout activities. And that, yeah, absolutely. In fact, I'm going to, this week, I'll be at our distribution center in Atlanta, working with our fleet there. I got to fly there Monday morning. And one of the things that I do every trip out there is I spot check them. I'm saying, okay, now I just pick 3 dates out of the air. Show me the yard logs from these 3 dates, and just on the fly. And they usually know when I'm coming that they better make sure that their ducks in a row. But so it's usually pretty good, but yeah, you have to make sure to keep them, keep them honest, make sure that they're doing the job that they need to do and that they're accountable for that. And not to mention too, it's the intention not to catch them red-handed or anything like that, or catch them in a mistake. It's to make sure that there are no gaps, but if there are gaps, there are opportunities. There are coaching opportunities where maybe individual drivers who are documenting something wrong, can be coached up to do it better. Or if there is a repeated issue, then yeah, it serves the lack of documentation serves as documentation in a disciplinary issue potentially. So we do frequently
doing it right. Anybody got a suggestion for what you would do if you catch them doing it right?
Pizza. Pizza.
Pizza. Well, and that's a great call out as well too, because as a result of those types of audits and a lot of other little things, we'll give out gift cards to our stores actually on a pretty regular basis. So there might be a situation where maybe a driver has had a perfect on-time delivery record for a month, so he might get a gift card and appreciation and a public call out. It's important to recognize the successes in a public way too. They set a great example for everybody else, and they positively reinforce the folks who are doing a good job as well. And you help turn those people into leaders too. In any operation that you have too, I can only lead so much. I need my team members to be leaders as well too. And I need, take a driver staff, for example. You might have a driver account manager and then a dispatcher. And then those folks jointly are responsible for maybe 20, 30 drivers, depending on the size of the operation. But they can't do it all. They need lead drivers. They need people. It's like the captains on a football team. You got the head coach and the coordinators and the rest of the coaching staff. but you still need your captains. You need those leaders in the locker room. And any operation is like that. Drivers in a driver fleet, you need those couple of guys who are helping to convey the right message, because they bought into the message and they help bring up all the other drivers. Those folks who are good fits for those types of roles, they're usually people who have good leadership skills and people who operate in an advanced level in whatever job job function that they perform. And those folks honestly are just as important as having good frontline managers.
Yeah, and I swear I didn't plant that question. I just thought of asking it now. But that's why on the days when I actually show up on time, I had to run home because I forgot the conferencing equipment.
Gotcha.
But on the days when I show up on time, that's why I keep putting those leadership principles up there. They're not technically part of the logistics class, but it really is. In any operation, anytime you get teams together, leaders are so important. People who will just step up and show everybody the way. And I haven't met any of you. I've had a chance to talk to all of you, meet all of you, and every one of you is totally capable of being that. Completely capable of being that kind of a person. And I think it's just so important, and it's something that, if you see it in yourself and you do it and you stick to those principles, that you're gonna do really well in your careers, and you're gonna make a lot of money doing it. So that's always a good thing too.
Yeah, that's definitely true. And really too, I'll just add another thing too. It makes it a more fun place to work too, if you can develop that leadership mentality in your team members. When you have people who are ambitious, inclined to go above and beyond and take initiative, that makes your job as a manager that much easier. And it also makes it a situation where everybody's really almost like trying to outdo each other to a certain extent, right? You have everybody trying to push the envelope and keep taking the organization forward. And you need a lot of that in a good, strong team that can that's consistently working to improve and get better at what you do.
Who else has a question? When Trump was threatening tariffs on Mexico, did that send you guys into a scramble?
A little bit, because of a lot of our produce coming out of Mexico. Yeah, I think there was a lot of concern about what would happen from a pricing standpoint. If you get produce and all of a sudden the costs go up 30% from the shippers, well, that does get passed on to the consumer. So there is a consequence in terms of the total landed cost of goods that you're bringing in. It's going to have an impact on your margins. It will probably have a negative effect on your sales in terms of having to raise prices to be able to cover a portion of that cost as well. So there was a lot of nervous folks about that when it comes to the tariffs. I think the times he's mentioned that the border needs to be closed, I think were even more concerning, actually, because in those situations, look, if you throw tariffs on, you can still get the product. It just costs more money. You're not getting it if the border's shut down. So that's, you're essentially, you're talking about cutting off supply lines, and that's not just our industry, but take the manufacturing organization that I was working with before. If you cut off a supply line, your plant stops running if you can't get product out. So it can be certainly a mixed bag, and I don't want to get into politics here or anything like that. In fact, my dad and I tend not to agree on a lot of that stuff sometimes, but the consequence of tariffs is, regardless of what the long-term economic impact is, there's immediate short-term, hopefully short-term, disruptions to your supply chain, either in the form of costs or in terms of potentially alternative sourcing that needs to happen, because you can't get product from the vendor that you used to be able to get. So you might have new trucking lanes that you need to set up and get pricing on, because you're picking up those same circuit boards I was talking about in my example earlier. Now you're getting them from a company that makes them in Utah somewhere instead of in Mexico. Your cost to ship might be greater or less depending on where you're getting it from. So there are just a number of different implications where they will legitimately throw your supply chain into disarray a little bit until you establish a new normal. If it winds up being a long-term situation, well, that is the new normal, and then that's a new challenge, just on a little bit of a different level than the truck burning up example earlier. You're faced with a situation that you don't really have a whole lot of control over. So how can you figure out, okay, how can I best fix this? Who do I need to engage? What other teams do I need to get involved to make this happen? What might possibly go wrong that I can try to anticipate as much as possible in advance so that it doesn't go wrong?
I have one last question. Do you do anything with rail?
No, we've looked at it here and there. Problem with rail is for a extremely time-sensitive commodity like what we have, the transits are usually a little bit longer, and we just usually can't work with that. Now that's gotten a lot better even in the last 5 or 6 years too. So I think you guys talked about rail last week as in your discussions about different transportation modes, or at least the book did. But with rail, if you remember, it's usually a decent cost option, and one of the biggest cost savings actually is on fuel. When gas shot up to $5 a gallon, however many years back that was, or $5 in California, $4 everywhere else, that was the first year intermodal transit for commodities that have traditionally gone only truckload. That was the year it really started taking off. Because you're saving potentially 15 to 20% because you're not paying fuel on the truck. So, but problem is for certain commodities, like I said, is you just have that situation where we can't afford that extra 12 hours or 24 hours it might be to get something from California to Atlanta. The other thing too, besides that timing thing, is if something does go wrong, you can't really rescue the freight. If I ship something LTL from Dallas to say South Bend, for example, and it's expected to be delivered in South Bend, Tuesday between 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. and it turns out that there's some kind of delay and it doesn't show up then, but it's going to be at the South Bend terminal Tuesday night. In order to have to wait until the following day, I can grab it Tuesday night if I need it. I can go get that out of the terminal. You can't do that when a train's in motion. You basically, if that train's starting to roll in California and it's not stopping until Dallas, you have no opportunity to recover if there's a cow on the track and train runs it over or something. So it's not a good fit for us from a timing standpoint. Cost is pretty close to neutral these days, so you're not really getting the bang for your buck with the savings. But it's a pretty efficient way to ship if you just have a lot of containers that you need to move from one side of the country to the other. And if that extra day or two of transit doesn't make a difference to you, and for many businesses it doesn't, they can write schedules around it. It could be a really, really good way to ship.
Last call for questions. You watching baseball later?
I might a little bit, yeah. I think I think the Yankees kept it interesting one more day in that series against the Astros.
Yeah, so one more day. Maybe I'll give you a call during the ball game then. Thank you so much.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody. You guys have a great Saturday. It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Great Saturday.
Take care. Too.
All right, so you got to go back to your